All right, cameras are rolling. There's the clap. And we are cue to go. Welcome to an episode of Z Integers. Z Integers is a podcast that focuses on the theme of integrity. Integrity has its root word in the word integer, and hence why I chose the word integer. And I believe the letter that represents integer is a Z or a Z, however you say it. And so I thought a clever name would be Z Integers. And so today we are talking about the question, what does integrity mean to you? What does integrity mean to you? This is a really simple yet deep question, I believe. Simple in the sense that, I don't know, how many words is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 words, right? And yet the depths to this question can take one to some scary places. Scary places because integrity is one of these words that most people have a difficulty trying to figure out, what does it actually mean? What do we mean when we say integrity? It's almost like we know what it should look like, we know what it should feel like, but rarely do we ever feel like we have access to this experience of integrity. And so along those lines, what does integrity mean is more along the lines of how to be able to understand how our world can make sense in totality or in a wholeness. I'm having some guests coming alongside here. So when I first came to think of integrity, I was in a season of life where I did not have integrity, where I knew I wanted it, but it seemed very far from me. It seemed like I didn't have access to it. And I lived in a setting, in a community where integrity was highly valued, where there seemed to be many examples of others who were living with integrity. And so the story that I was telling myself in my mind was, I must be the only person in this community who does not have integrity, because when I observe others around me, when I see how others are engaging and living their lives, I feel very far from that presentation of what integrity could look like. And I think so many of us have this sense where when we think of what does integrity mean to us, we play this comparison game. We look at others around us and say, that person seems to be living with integrity in contrast to me, who I know far better, and I know I'm definitely not living with integrity. And as a result, we sort of put ourselves in this category where others are doing better and we're doing horribly. And so we put ourselves we diminish our worth in contrast to those that we're in community with. So that was my experience. I looked around and I said, these people seem to be living with integrity because they seem to be saying the right things, they seem to be living the right way, they seem to be feeling and thinking the things that a person with integrity should be thinking and feeling. And when I compare myself, I am so far from that because for me personally, I think that I am lacking integrity because I know how I think. I know the things that I struggle with. I know the way that I engage. I know all of my actions in detail in a way that no one else does. And when I see myself, I don't have that. I don't have this integrity. So integrity to me was something that I desperately wanted, but I wasn't sure if I had access to. I wasn't sure if I could actually feel it for myself. I wasn't sure if it could ever be applied to me, which is a very sad thing. It's a very debilitating thought. It was one that communicated much discouragement to me that I could ever approach what that could look like. And as a result, when I thought of what integrity means to me, I felt extremely isolated. I felt extremely other. I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I could connect with others. I didn't even feel safe to open up to connect with others and share what was really going on for me. Just remembering where I once was, I remember these feelings and these memories as vividly as I can, because as I remember, it reminds me not to forget where I came from. And so going back there again, it makes me sad. It makes me sad when I think of all of what I was experiencing when I was there. Integrity, I don't know if I could have defined it back then, other than something about being right or living correctly, thinking correctly, like everything internally and externally matching and aligning. But I definitely didn't have that. I was a master of being a hypocrite at that time of my life. And my hypocrisy expressed itself where I tried to act like I had everything put together. I tried to act like I was living with integrity when I knew that I really wasn't experiencing the real thing. And it makes me think now how at that time I was thinking that I was the only one who was like this. But knowing what I know now, I can't help but think there are so many of us, like the majority of us societally, who are where I once was. You see, like part of that intimidating and isolating factor is that we think we're the only ones struggling the way we are struggling, when in reality there's so many who are having similar challenges in trying to live like we are. And so I wish I'd known that then, because then I might have reached out for help and I might have found others who could share the same experience as I was experiencing instead of having to feel it on my own. And I wonder how many of you listening feel the same way, where you think that you're the only one who's that messed up, the way you think, the way you engage in the world. How many of you had that same feeling like I was? And so the reality might very well be that we are suffering collectively in isolation. We're suffering together while trying to figure out how to do better. And so it took me a long while to get to a better understanding of what integrity means to me. I have a far better grasp on what integrity means to me now, and the way I got here was extremely painful. It involved me coming back to know who I was and what it meant to be me in the first place. And it meant me looking at myself honestly in the first place. And so I've come up with a definition of what integrity means to me now. I've had some time to think about it, and that's what's helped. And so I'm going to share that with you. And even as I share that with you, if there's elements of it that resonate with you, by all means, take them for yourself and apply them to yourself. But here's what I feel integrity means to me now, or at least how I define integrity to me. And for me, integrity is the desire to consistently have my internal values align or match my external actions in a way whereby I am respecting myself and letting others around me figure out what that means for them. And that's something I found really important and helpful for me. And so again, integrity for me is the desire for consistently having my internal values aligned with my external actions while respecting myself and letting others around me also figure out what that means for them. In essence, it's like my way of saying, how can I let others figure out their own life while I figure out my own? A whole part of our experience in life usually revolves around distracting ourselves with other people's problems and other people's choices and engagements, because as we focus on others, we get to avoid the things that we're trying to figure out, the ways that we're struggling. And we actively want to forget what we're working through or struggling with, because when we get to ignore whatever we're doing, we don't have to do the courageous thing of seeing ourselves in the mirror, of doing the hard work on working on ourselves and what does it mean for us to be better. And I think so many of us struggle this way, don't we? It is far easier for us to point the finger at other people around us and say, oh, look at all these people who are so messed up, and trying to figure out how their life is, supposed to make sense. And we have so much to say, so much insights on how to be able to apply some advice to so many of those around us. But when it comes to ourselves, that's a lot of work, right? We'd rather not have to do that work, because that is really difficult. That is really courageous. That's really challenging. That's really like putting our feet to the fire. Man, that's not comfortable, is it? So let me just go back again to my definition again. Again, for me, integrity is the desire to consistently have my internal values align with my external actions in a way whereby I'm respecting myself and honoring those around me to be able to figure out their own choices. I don't want to focus on other people's stuff. I want to focus on my own stuff. Another way of saying this is, for my lifetime, listen carefully, for my lifetime, I have enough of a challenge working on me. I can, for the rest of my life, continue to focus on me and not run out of things to be working on in getting to be a better version of myself. That is really important for me to know. And when I reflect on that, when I remember that, I can let other people around me figure out their own stuff. They may ask me for advice, they may ask me for insights, they may ask me for some thoughts on whatever they're dealing with. I'm happy to share my suggestions or my thoughts, but they're not my priority. My priority is right here. Even myself as a parent, I remember for quite a few years, the hypocrisy that I led my family with. I'd do it differently if I could do it again. I would do it differently, whereby I would work on me first. I would work on myself first. I'd work on being a better version of myself so that I could lead by example. And I know I have a responsibility to my kids to help lead them well. I have a responsibility to my kids to be able to help them grow to be individuals with character and show them the right way, yes. But first and foremost, I needed to work on me, and I didn't do that. And so I'm learning a few things backwards, if you will. And now my kids are growing up, they're in that mid-season of kiddom, if I can put it that way. And now I'm a lot more aware of when I have that urge to say you shouldn't or you should do this or that, because I'm reminded, oh yeah, let me also continue to keep the spotlight on myself. Let me break down my definition that I was sharing with you of what integrity means to me. Again, I said integrity for me is the desire to consistently have my internal values match or align with my external actions. Let me just break that down just a little bit so you can understand why I put those sequence of words together. I started off with the desire, and the desire is really important for me. In my life, I want to be able to engage from a premise whereby I'm doing the things I really want to do. For example, this video series, this podcast, I really want to do this. This means a lot for me to do. This is extremely important to me. I'm driven by a sense of purpose. I'm driven by a sense of desire and urgency that I want to get this message out because it's so important to me. I want to invest energy in this. And so I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because I get to, because I love to, because this is my purpose. I want to do this. See, can you hear the desire behind this? The desire for me is so critical and crucial. Like, this is so important for me to do, but I desire to do this. And when I'm talking about integrity, especially living with integrity, so important is this idea that we are leading with this sense of desire. We want to do this because we desire to do this. Like, this is so important for us to do, right? And so there are some of you who are listening who are thinking of this idea of integrity, saying, I have to do this. And in my perspective, when we have to do something, when we're doing it grudgingly, when we're doing it, but we're not really interested in following through on it, the follow through is not going to be from totality. And that's one of those words I think of when I think of the word integrity. The reason why I chose integers, Z integers, for this podcast is when we think about the word integer, part of the essence of that word is wholeness, like totality. And so when we're doing something because we feel begrudged to do it, it doesn't quite come across compellingly. And that's why I lead with the word desire. The desire, we gotta want this. And there may be some of you who are like, I really want it, but I just don't know how to do it. It starts off with a desire, I believe. Starting off with this desire, but we really want to commit ourselves to living with integrity. That desire to say, I want to experience this wholeness in the way I see the world, experience the world, live in this world. That is so critical. And so when I think about my experience, I mean, I desired it, I just did not know how to go about doing it. And a huge part for me was looking for those role models who could talk about, model, and sort of lead the way in these conversations and saying, here's what it looks like to live and pursue integrity. And that's what I hope to do for so many of you men. So many of you men. Men especially, just because I was once a young man, and I think men are desperately in need of having this at the forefront of their existence, of what does it mean for you to exist as a man in this world, in the purpose that you're pursuing and the way you're living. And so that's why I want to do this podcast, is to create this opportunity, to have this chance to get this message out to you so you can start thinking about, what does this look like for me to live with integrity, to walk with integrity, to engage my world with integrity? How can I have this desire? And that desire is this hungering for, this longing for, this wanting it. You are pursuing it in essence. That's one of the ways I typify this idea of integrity, is I'm pursuing it for a lifetime. I want to keep on pursuing it, just like we do even in our relationships. When you're in a romantic relationship, when you cease or stop pursuing your partner, things start to sort of like diminish a little bit, don't they? And so you start retracting a little bit that way, right? And so that's why that's a really important part for me. This desire, I can't say enough of why this is an important starting place for this conversation in integrity and what it means for ourselves. And that's why I include it at the very forefront of my definition of what integrity means to me. It starts off with this desire. The desire for consistency is a really big part, and that's why, again, I included this at the very beginning of my definition of what integrity means to me. The consistency part is really important, because imagine a world where there was no consistency. For example, imagine you were inconsistent in your attendance at work. For example, you probably wouldn't have a job for very long. Imagine you were inconsistent in keeping your word to your friends. When you say you're going to be there and you don't show up, they're going to start putting together this lack of expectancy of you being true to your word. And so they're not going to want to relate as much with you. Imagine inconsistency even in the natural world. Here we are in the midst of fall. I don't know if you can tell, but the trees, the leaves are turning yellow. It's a beautiful time of the year when the season is shifting from summer to winter in that intermediate fall category. Lovely time. Like, I'm looking at the trees in front of me here. Oh golly, it's just gorgeous. But imagine a world where there's no consistency of seasons and it was just all haphazard. We would have such a difficult time planning. Imagine if the sun was inconsistent in rising and setting, and the world revolving around the sun. Like, we rely so much on consistency. And same with integrity. When we are not committed to consistency and living with integrity and exemplifying and applying integrity in our lives, then we don't get to enjoy the full flavor of what integrity promises, the richness of life that we get to live because we apply ourselves consistently to living with integrity. So I locked that word consistency right at the very outset, right after the desire. I think that the desire comes first, and then the consistency should be the next thing that is honed in on for us to strive for. This does not mean that we are aiming to be perfect and to never relinquish. As human beings, we are never going to have that experience of perfection this side of death, I believe. We're going to keep on messing up our way forward. I'm going to keep on messing my way forward. And yet, in the midst of me trying to be consistent, I want to continue to pursue and make sure that consistency is as high as I can get it in the way that I'm applying myself to living with integrity. That is so critical and crucial. So consistency is a huge part. So once again, the desire to consistently have my internal values. Now, the internal values are those things that we feel are really important to us. Those things that we're like, hey, this is so important for how we see the world, how it makes sense to us. A huge part of that comes from how we grew up, like the things, the values, the ways that we were taught, what's right, what's wrong. What are the things that we had honed in when we were growing up saying, this is really important? And how do we make sense of that as we grow up? What sort of things do we align with when we say, this makes sense to me and this is what I really resonate with, for example? That's a really huge part. And so what does that look like for you? Like those values that you feel so strongly to your core. For some of you, like me, you grew up in the church. And so a huge part of your values, they derive from your participation in the religious spectrum. Others of you would count yourself more spiritual, and so along those lines, you're thinking more along the lines of how that brings some clarity to what your values are, how you experience nature, how you experience your relationships with people in general, how you go about doing your work, and so on. Like these things define a lot of that. For most of us, the way we grew up, the guardians and the parents and the coaches and the various people that invested in us had a huge part in helping us understand what does it look like for us to live with these values that we were taught are really important. How do we live by the golden principle, for example? Like whatever it is, those things that you feel so strongly and that you're like, this is like so tremendously important. And then how do we go about trying to apply that to ourselves? You see, having that internal moral framework, I think we all have it. It's kind of like the thing that makes us say you should or you shouldn't, right? And when we have that idea, it enables us now to move into a different zone of looking at the expectations we have of ourselves and the expectations we have of those around us as well. So for many people, this is where they have a certain value saying, I don't think you should lie at all, or I don't think you should cheat at all. And so that's the moral commitment that they have, right? For others, it might be that their most important things are that you should be a hard worker, like you should always give your 100% at work or at sports and play or whatever it is. There are these moral frameworks that we subscribe to that say this is super important. That's what I mean when I say that moral internal value system that we all have. When we have those internal moral frameworks that we subscribe to, not the ones that we're forced to have, but the ones that we hold to saying this makes sense to me, when we have those align with our external actions, and here comes the rub. How do we have that connection there? Because for so many, they have the internal values, say like, for example, you should never lie, but then they see themselves lying and they're like, this is my commitment that I feel strongly about, but they don't actually keep it. And so living a lifetime like that, you start not looking at yourself seriously by way of respect. You start saying, I'm such a hypocrite, but you can't let anyone know because then you'd be judged. And that's where I was for so many years. I had my internal values that I thought I subscribed to, but I couldn't follow through in the actions components. I had the desire, like I said at the beginning, but I didn't have the consistency. I had the internal values, but I didn't have the external actions that aligned with my internal values. Now, I always kind of did the wrong thing when no one was watching, so people actually thought that I had integrity, but I knew myself well, and I knew that if they really knew me, then I'd be a write-off, right? So that's why I say it's really important to have all these components in my definition. The desire to consistently have your internal values align or match with your external actions while you're respecting yourself and making space for others to do their own thing. Making space for others is really important, I feel, because, like I say, it's so easy for us to focus on other people's crap, other people's issues, but that's really a distraction from our chance to work on ourselves, I feel. And so that's why I say integrity. I mean, what does it mean to you? I'm not going to judge your definition. I'm going to ask questions perhaps about it, but I'm not going to judge you for how you arrived at whatever makes sense to you. My dear listener, it is possible to have all of these things in my definition. The latter part I was saying is respecting yourself. Respecting yourself is a huge part, because my goal was, can I look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm good. I respect me. Regardless of how messy I am, I can at least look at myself honestly and say, you're worthwhile. And we're gonna start at this point getting better, but like, this is the first place in starting off by saying, I'm gonna give myself some love, I'm gonna give myself some respect, I'm gonna honor me. And then respecting others, and that's saying others, they can figure their own stuff out. I'm gonna make space for them to figure their own stuff out, but in the meantime, I'm gonna work on me. I would love to be able to share with you in this series, in this sequence, in the conversations that I'm going to be having on this podcast going forward on the integers, more about what it means to live with integrity and how you could have all of what I was describing here. So once again, let me tell you my full definition of what integrity means to me. For me, integrity means the desire to consistently have one's internal values match or align with their external actions while respecting themselves and letting others be around them. That is what integrity for me means. And my goal through investing energy into this podcast is to inspire you as well to live with integrity, to commit to living with integrity and seeing the tremendous benefit that comes when we commit ourselves, when we immerse ourselves in walking this courageous, challenging life that is marked by integrity. That is what I want to give myself to. Therein is my purpose, is to inspire you that way and to encourage you to join me in being a fellow integer, walking through this life, living it on purpose. Thanks for sitting with me for the last half hour here and listening in. I'd love to hear your comments below. If you have any questions, I would love to serve you well. And I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast as we talk more about integrity and what it means to us. Chat with you soon.